Hello and welcome to today's web seminar, How CSA Scores Impact the Growth and Insurance Costs for Transportation Companies. Today's web seminar is brought to you by Interstate Motor Carriers Capacity Agency LLC and has two guest speakers, John Kellenberger, Esquire, an attorney who specializes in transportation litigation, and Craig Weindorf, Vice President of Interstate Motor Carriers and a transportation risk management expert. Before we begin, a little bit about the technology we'll be using today. All of your lines have been muted for the duration of the web seminar. However, you can enter any inquiries that you have at any time throughout the broadcast, and we'll queue them up for the end of the presentation. You can also slide the GoToWebinar box closed by clicking the double arrow or orange arrow, but do not click the black X, or you will exit the web seminar. Without further ado, please welcome Craig Weindorf.
Thank you, John. Good afternoon, everyone. As John said, my name is Craig Weindorf, and I am the Vice President of Sales at Interstate Motor Carriers Capacity Agency in Freehold. We specialize in insuring truckers for over 75 years, and today I'm going to talk about how your CSA scores affect your insurance. Several years ago, underwriters only had a few pieces of information to consider when rating a transportation risk: where you're located, what you haul, where you go, your claims history, and your driver's motor vehicle records. Next slide, please. Then the government got a little more involved, and they came out with the SAFER system, Safety and Fitness Electronic Records. As most of you are probably aware with this system, the insurance companies can now rate you based on your vehicle out of service percentage, your driver out of service percentage, and your carrier safety rating. Carriers can have 4 safety ratings: satisfactory, conditional, unsatisfactory, or no rating at all. Pretty much anything other than a satisfactory rating, and you're going to have a very difficult time obtaining a competitive insurance quote. Next slide, please. Now the insurance underwriters have several more factors to consider when rating a risk via the SMS system, which stands for Safety Measurement System. There are 7 basics included in the SMS. Basic is Behavioral Analysis and Safety Improvement category. These are unsafe driving, hours of service compliance, driver fitness, controlled substance and alcohol, vehicle maintenance, hazardous materials compliance, and your crash indicator. Next slide, please. Every insurance company puts a different emphasis on each basic, but as an unwritten rule of thumb, if you have less than 1 basic alert and a good loss ratio, underwriters will be probably happy to work with you. If you have 2 or more basic alerts, underwriters will be hesitant to consider the risk, even if you have a stellar loss history. Next slide, please. This is one example of a company's SMS rating. As you can see, ABC Trucking, who I hope is not listening to us today, has 3 basics in alert status. This account would virtually be impossible to place with a competitive insurance company. Next slide, please. I'm now going to go into a little more detail with each basic category and how most insurance companies review these, and what you can do to make your company more attractive to the insurance company. First is the unsafe driving category. This includes your driver's moving violations, speeding, improper lane changing, and reckless driving. Quite simply, the insurance company is going to view this as the more violations your driver has, the more likely they're going to be involved in an accident, and the more a claim could potentially be. Many drivers always tell me, well, I have no points on my license. Well, an insurance company is not going to care about the number of points you have on your MVR. Just because you went to court or you took a class to reduce your points, the insurance company's eyes, that's not going to prevent you from getting into an accident. Next slide, please. So what can you do to keep your insurance costs down? First, develop a policy stating that the drivers are responsible for adhering to all safe driving related federal, state, and local laws and ordinances, including the prohibition against using radar detectors and the wearing of seatbelts. Don't allow your drivers to use radar detectors. Make sure they're wearing seatbelts at all times, and also have a strict no cell phone policy when driving. Many companies will now view a cell phone ticket as a moving violation. Penalize your drivers for speeding even if there's no ticket issued. Prohibit dispatchers from assigning a driver a load that cannot be completed without speeding. And prohibit passengers from being on board non-passenger vehicles. Passengers are just a bad idea and can be very distracting. Many insurance companies will not even cover you if you have passengers in your vehicle, and you would have to get a separate passenger policy. Next slide, please. The next basic is your hours of service compliance. This basic includes your logbook violations and going over your hours of service. The insurance company is going to view this that if a driver is found to be over their hours of service when they're involved in an accident, it's very difficult to defend a claim even if the third party involved was clearly at fault. Also, having a lot of hours of service violations shows the insurance company a lack of control with your drivers. They want you to be in complete control of every aspect of your operation. Next slide, please. So what can you do to keep your costs down? Develop a policy and a procedure describing how you will monitor and track logs for falsification. Many companies hire a logbook person to review logs on a daily basis. Prohibit dispatchers from assigning loads to drivers without hours of service available to complete the load on time. Develop a policy stating that drivers should not violate their hours of out of service under any circumstance, and immediately contact the carrier when a driver is placed out of service. You want to come up with a disciplinary policy with regards to your logbook violations. For example, step 1, a verbal warning. Step 2, a written warning. Step 3, probation, etc., etc. Require your drivers to report their available hours of service to dispatch during check-in calls. And also make drivers required to check with their supervisor when they're reviewing their fit for duty status before starting a job. Next slide, please. Now going into the driver fitness basic. This includes having the proper identifications and certifications at all times. Drivers must have their CDLs on them at all times, and if they're required, their med cert. How the company is going to view this, once again, it's very difficult to defend a claim without your proper license or medical cert. Typically, an insurance company requires any new hires to be between 25 and 65 years of age and have at least 3 years of on-the-road experience. Now, there are exceptions to this rule by some insurance company, but that is pretty standard practice. Next slide, please. So what can you do to keep your insurance costs down with regards to this driver fitness? Every 6 months, you should review your driver qualification files, including your MVRs, med certs, CDL expiration dates. Many drivers don't even know when their CDL or their med cert expires. So as a company, you need to stay on top of this for them. Don't rely on them to know when their CDL or their med cert expires. Require all new drivers to submit documentation of training and their previous employment history. Develop a policy for document retention and record keeping, and they should be in the possession of the driver as proof of credential. Punish a driver if they don't have their CDL or med cert on them at all times. You don't want your score to be affected simply because your driver forgot to have their CDL or their med cert during a roadside inspection. Develop a process to ensure that operations will always have the proper amount of fit drivers. Make sure you always have enough qualified drivers. You don't want to turn down a load simply because you don't have a driver to do the load. Or, even worse, hire a non-qualified driver to do a load. Next slide, please. Under the controlled substance and alcohol basic, simply, you cannot hire a driver with a DUI, even if it occurred in their personal vehicle. It's virtually impossible to defend a claim when a driver is involved in an accident under the influence. An insurance company typically will not accept a driver that has been convicted of a DUI within the last 5 years. Some companies even go back 10 years, and even one violation under this category could be enough for a company to decline your risk. You just need to tell your drivers, if you want to be a truck driver, you can't do drugs, and you certainly can't drink and drive. Next slide, please. So what to do to keep your costs down? Develop a written company policy incorporating testing, training, and records of retention for all employees. Stay up to date with all your drug testing. Ensure your drivers who are randomly tested can be immediately removed if they are found to be positive. You can't have anyone testing positive driving for you. That's just a giant no-no. Establish written policies and procedures that promote, verify, and enforce adherence to all controlled substance and alcohol rules and regulations. Develop a policy to ensure that all alcohol testing is conducted immediately before or after the period that employees are performing a safety-sensitive function. You absolutely must drug test your drivers after any serious violation or accident. And develop a driver selection protocol that gives random drug testing. This will enable you to further ensure that your drivers are clean if they have the fear that somehow they might be randomly drug tested. Next slide, please. Your vehicle maintenance basic. Violations could include brakes, lights, mechanical defects, or improper load securement. The insurance company is going to view this that sometimes an accident is out of your driver's control. You could have faulty brakes, low tread on tires, a broken taillight, an engine malfunction, or even an improperly loaded trailer could be the cause of an accident. You could be the best driver in the world, but if you have a faulty truck or an improperly loaded trailer, you could still be involved in an accident. Next slide, please. Now, I've separated this basic into two separate categories, cargo and inspection and repair and maintenance. The first one we're going to talk about is the cargo with regards to the vehicle maintenance basic. You want to establish a policy for your employees for completion of annual training on cargo handling, loading, and securement. Develop a policy that details driver procedures for load limit verification, loading, unloading, securement, and en route inspections. This policy should also address steps to be taken when the shipper will not allow the driver to check the load. For example, if the driver is not allowed on the shipper's property or the container is sealed. If you have a policy in place that addresses what to do if your driver can't inspect a load, and somehow we can prove that the shipper loaded the trailer improperly, that can go a long way towards handling a claim. Ensure that your purchasing agent communicates requirements for adequate securement devices, equipment, and spare parts, and develop a policy for appropriate personnel to set accurate expectations with customers about the time needed to ensure the integrity of the cargo. You should educate your drivers as much as possible with regards to cargo securement. A lot of times, especially, for example, with a reefer load, the driver doesn't set the reefer, but if they're educated enough, they might catch a mistake, and it could potentially save you a load. Next slide, please. Now going into the inspection, repair, and maintenance. Develop a system of preventive maintenance, safe and efficient fleet operations, including a schedule for periodic maintenance, inspection, and record keeping. Ensure that vehicle defects that impact safety or safety compliance are reported, repaired, and certified before the vehicle is operated. Confirm that management is notified of any vehicle defects from your drivers, such as a call-in or an email from your mechanic. And also require drivers to immediately notify the management of any roadside vehicle out of service order. Obviously, under this category, the better you maintain your vehicle, the safer you're going to be on the road, less accidents you're going to have, less claims, lower insurance costs. Next slide, please. Under the hazardous materials, I'm not sure how many hazmat carriers we have listening, so we'll run through this one fairly quickly. But many insurance companies will not even insure hazmat carriers because in the event of a claim, the likelihood of a large pollution claim is very high. Some trucking companies say they don't haul hazmat or are not even aware that what they are hauling is hazardous. But if there's violations under this category, the insurance company is surely going to know and will possibly decline your risk. We have some carriers that don't even know what they're hauling is hazardous, maybe something in the load, in the packaging. Make sure, if it's possible, make sure to know exactly what you're hauling, because you don't want to have a roadside inspection and have an unneeded SMS violation if you don't have the proper identification or certification or placards. Next slide, please. Okay, we're running a little short here on time, so I'm going to just go through this one pretty quick. In a nutshell, on this slide, if you're hauling hazmat, make sure the driver is certified, has the proper training, and has all of the proper placards and markings on your trailers. Like I said, you don't want to have a violation simply because you didn't know what you were hauling or you didn't have the proper placard. Next slide, please. And the seventh and final basic category is your crash indicator. This percentage includes your accidents. And the higher this number, the more likely you are to be involved in an accident in the insurance company's eyes. Next slide, please. So what can you do to keep your insurance costs down with regards to your crash indicator? Now this is pretty much reviewing what, on a brief overview of everything we've discussed. Basically, develop a policy stating that the drivers are responsible for adhering to all safe driving related federal, state, and local laws and ordinances, including the wearing of seatbelts and no cell phone use. I want to add that to my slide here. No cell phone use is a huge issue these days, so make sure you have a no cell phone use policy. Ensure drivers practice and apply safe defensive driving techniques and skills. Prohibit passengers, and ensure that vehicle defects that impact safety and compliance are reported, repaired, and certified before the vehicle is operated. Next slide, please. Now, a lot of where these suggestions of what you should be doing to help lower your SMS scores have come from this diagram, the safety management cycle. I've really only touched the surface here today with what this cycle includes, but basically the FMCSA has developed a step-by-step plan for you to follow to ensure that you run a safe trucking operation, which in turn will help lower your insurance costs. Next slide, please. The safety management cycle is made up of 6 safety management processes, which are laid out in a specific order to represent the areas of a motor carrier's operation. First, your policies and procedures basically defines the what and how of a motor carrier's operation. This is mostly what I've discussed in detail today as it's most relevant to insurance. The other 5 SMPs focus on how to implement the policies and procedures. Second, your roles and responsibilities defines what each employee should do to successfully implement the policies and procedures. Third, your qualification and hiring discusses recruiting, screening applicants to fulfill the roles and responsibilities for positions. The fourth is your training and communication, which outlines a motor carrier's communication of its policies, procedures, roles, and responsibilities. Next slide, please. Your 5th one is your monitor and tracking, which concentrates on the need to have a system in place to monitor and track employee performance and enables companies to be aware of their employee safety performance and compliance with its policies and procedures. And the 6 is meaningful action, which gives motor carriers the tools to correct or improve employee behavior, for example, training, positive reinforcement such as rewards or bonuses. By reviewing each of these processes, there's an opportunity to identify and correct breakdowns in your SMPs before the safety and compliance issues are identified or crashes occur. You can review all these in detail via the link I've provided here at the bottom of this slide, and I highly recommend that you incorporate this into your business practice. It's a great tool to use. Next slide, please. Now, if you take one thing away from today's webinar, I cannot stress this enough. Put it in writing. Develop a written progressive disciplinary policy focused on taking corrective action. It should include, among other things, written warnings, suspensions, work restrictions, monetary penalties, and/or termination. This policy should also specify consequences for any carrier official who knowingly and willingly allows any basic violations. And develop a policy requiring drivers to submit copies of all roadside inspections of violations to carrier management within 24 hours. You don't want to leave these violations, for a week. Make sure you have in writing that the driver, any violation, has to report it within 24 hours. Next slide, please. So to basically sum up, a low basic score equals lower insurance rates. The more ammo you can give your insurance agent to sell to the insurance company, the better chance you're going to have of getting a more competitive rate. This includes written procedures, written responses of a corrective plan of action. Monitor your CSA scores on violations to identify the types of accidents or occurrences. And if you do have a basic alert, make sure you have in writing specific incidents as to why this affected your score and a plan of action to prevent this from happening in the future. Check your scores frequently, because we all know the FMCSA has been known to make mistakes, so we've seen a lot of false violations going into people's scores and affecting their scores when they shouldn't be. And make sure you have a truck insurance specialist to help you with all of these things. A company with no SMS alerts is going to have a great chance of obtaining a more competitive quote than a company with one or more alerts. More and more insurance companies are putting a greater emphasis on these scores every day, some companies even more than your loss history. They believe if you have a decent loss history, but your scores are poor, then you're much more likely to have claims in the future. I'm now going to turn it over to John Kellenberger to speak about how your CSA impacts growth.
Thank you very much, Craig. And just two real quick points I want to jump on that Craig mentioned. The first is cell phone use. Craig is exactly right in mentioning that that is a huge issue. Number one, it should be prohibited on texting. But more importantly, in New Jersey, you as a carrier should be concerned about any texts you are sending when you are aware that your driver could potentially be driving. There was a recent New Jersey Appellate Division case that holds that folks who are texting people that they know or have reason to believe are operating a motor vehicle can be held liable for damages that are caused in an accident. So just be aware that you want to really keep control of any texting that's coming on, either through your dispatch system or your organization out to folks that you know or have reason to believe are driving. Secondly, really quickly, as to Craig's point about the written procedures, it's exactly right. And you want to make sure that once you have those written procedures in place, that you are enforcing them consistently, and that you're not, once you start not enforcing your procedures consistently, you really don't have procedures in the context of a lawsuit and a claim. So just those two quick tips. In terms of the CSA scores and growing your business, I encourage you to think of your CSA scores. Obviously, safety is the number one concern, but also as a model to help you grow your business. I do a lot of work representing freight brokers and shippers throughout the country. The freight brokers and shippers are very attuned to your CSA scores nowadays, and the reason for that is there's an increasing trend in courts throughout the United States to hold brokers and even shippers liable for accidents involving motor carriers who have deficient safety scores. I'm sure that a lot of you guys are aware that there's been the recent trend of hiring brokers liable for what's called negligent hiring or negligent retention. And basically what that is if the motor carrier has safety scores that are deficient, so in the old SMS, the system, if they had scores over 75, the courts would find that the broker was negligent in hiring them and putting a dangerous carrier on the road. In New Jersey and in Wisconsin and a few other states, shippers, sophisticated shippers, have even been found to be liable, or the potential to be liable, for putting motor carriers or for contracting with motor carriers and putting them on the road when they have deficient safety scores. The difficult part now for brokers and for shippers in interpreting your CSA scores is there's not a lot of court cases that tell them what's the threshold. So I have a lot of brokers coming to me and saying, can I allow 1 alert out of 7? Can I broker freight to carriers that have 2 alerts? What's the sweet spot? And it's difficult for an attorney to give guidance in that situation because we don't have the precedent to kind of advise them, this court has said this court has said that. There's not a lot of data out there for the attorneys. So attorneys being attorneys are going to be very conservative and cover themselves and say, you put forth the most conservative policies in terms of the CSA scores. So you want to kind of keep those scores as strong as possible to market yourself. Next slide, please. As Craig mentioned, you want to monitor your CSA scores for inaccuracies. And I've been involved with a lot of clients who have also had inaccurate scores, inaccurate violations being posted on there. But more importantly, I think you want to have an intervention plan and explanations ready to go. So when that broker calls and wants to qualify you, and you know that you have a CSA score that's higher in one area, well, what's really helpful and what a lot of brokers are going to look for is that you have an intervention plan that's reasonable to deal with that problem. And so you can say to the brokers, safety folks, look, we know that this basic is a little higher, these two are a little higher. Here's what we're doing to deal with that. So then the broker has a complete file that in the event that there is litigation, they can say, look, we did our due diligence. We knew that at the time we brokered the load to the carrier, they had a CSA score or 2 CSA scores that were higher, but they told us this is what they were doing to deal with that, and that's reasonable. And they were trying to correct the problem. It gets into a real gray area when brokers try to qualify you and your scores are high, and you can't give them anything to back up what you're doing. So make it easy on your customer. Make it easy to just say, here you go. We know we have this issue, and here's what we're doing to correct it. And that's kind of why I say, have that packet ready. Have everything ready to go. So when the broker is looking to qualify you, you've addressed all the issues. You're not going to have a couple of hours of going back and forth between the broker, safety folks, and you explaining, oh, well, this basic is this, and we're doing this. Have it all ready, fax it to them, and then you're qualified in the system and good to go. So kind of anticipate those things beforehand, and I think it'll go a lot smoother in terms of getting yourself qualified to to move the freight for the brokers, and a lot more shippers are looking at this, so you'll have something to give to them as well. So without further ado, I will open it up to questions, I think, John.
Yes, thank you very much, John, and thank you very much, Craig, as well, for the very interesting and informative presentation today. And as we are very sensitive to your time here at Interstate, we're going to forego our question and answer session today, but we're going to run a confidential poll that will allow anybody who would like to speak with Craig or John about insurance needs, CSA scores, or any other questions that you might have about the content that was presented today. Please feel free to respond to that poll and let us know how we could best contact you. I'll leave that poll open for about 60 seconds and then show Craig's contact info again on the screen. And with that, we appreciate everybody for attending. We had a very large audience today who nearly all of you stayed the entire time, so we're very happy that you found this webinar that important and relevant. Please be looking for future Interstate Motor Carriers webinars. With that, this web seminar is now ending. Have a great day.